would say that the analogous parts of the pizza, well, for the introduction, most of us, if we went out for pizza or if we had friends over for pizza, we'd have maybe some appetizers and a beverage, like a root beer. But that really isn't pizza. Pizza consists of the crucial elements of pizza. I think begins with a crust. If you don't have a crust, it's not a pizza. And by analogy, if you don't have a hypothesis or a model, you really don't have an experimental study. The methods are kind of perfunctory. You know, they're not the most creative section of what we write in our scientific articles. They're almost boilerplate, almost repetitive, but they are essential so that you can't make a pizza without a pan, but it's not the pan that everybody raves about. You don't say, oh, boy, they use the best pans at Giovanni's Pizza Store. So we talk about the crust and the sauce for the most part. Now, sauce, I think, is analogous to the results. It's the most important, it's what you take away from the reading the paper, and it generally, in my experience, takes the longest time. So it needs time for the results to simmer. It takes a lot of work to make a good sauce, and that's my analogy for that. Now, discussion, I'd say the analogy for that is the cheese and the toppings. So we'll get into more detail about that in a little bit, but it is probably the most creative part of a scientific experimental report, where you can use your imagination and you can customize it more to your audience. Next slide, please. All right, well, let's start with crust. And so I'm not lazy, but I try to conserve my time. And I have a recommendation for all your graduate students, is that you get yourself a bread machine. Bread machines are very easy to come by if you go to a second-hand store, Salvation Army or something like that. They're cheap. And the main reason is because most people don't use them, and most people get them as wedding gifts. So if you know somebody who just got married maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they've got one that they're ready to give away. And I love the bread machine because you can set a timer for it. I can set up the pizza dough when I leave for school in the morning, and when I come home, the pizza dough is all ready and ready for me to roll out and make. Sorry about the noise there. Jason just told me. So in your bread machine, you've got this bucket, basically. And the basic recipe that I use is 1 cup whole wheat flour, 1 cup of unbleached white flour. Now, you can vary this recipe. For example, if you're at the University of Iowa, you're probably want to use 100% white flour. And if you're at the University of Santa Cruz, you're definitely going to go with 100% whole wheat flour. But here in Boulder, kind of a mixture of the two gives us a nice balance, easy to work with dough. All right, next ingredient, 1 cup water, 1 teaspoon of oil, and, well, I guess I put the yeast down there. 1 teaspoon of yeast. Bread machine yeast is what I always use because it's cheap. Instead of buying those little packets they have to tear open. And 1 tablespoon of oil. The big T, in case you don't follow cooking shows, 15 means tablespoon. And I never have measured a tablespoon, but I always just put in what I think is the right amount of oil. And you also notice I just use plain old canola for the crust. I don't notice a difference if I use olive oil or not. So that's it. So anybody can do that before you leave for school in the morning. Try to make it quiet. That goes in the bread machine. Set the bread aside. I usually use the whole wheat setting if even if it's half whole wheat. And we'll start the bread machine going. All right, next slide, please. So sauce. So the dough, in reality, takes about 2 hours to make in the bread machine, but you can set the timer however you want. So, sauce, get rid of this. All right. So, sauce I do use olive oil, and I don't care if it's extra virgin or not. And I think I should bring my stove out to view without burning myself. Got a little electric hot plate here. So I put a little olive oil in there. And then I usually just use your white onions. They call them brown onions, but they're not very brown. For this, I don't use a red onion in my sauce. And you want to start with the onions because they take a little while to turn that down. Onions take a little while to cook, and this is when you get the flavors out of onions. They caramelize, which we're not going to talk about the chemical reaction of caramelize. And the beauty of live TV, when you drop a spoon on the floor, you get to pick it up and run it off. Alright, so while the onions are starting to saute, is when I add my spices. And I keep it pretty simple. I've got a little bit of basil, which I carefully measure. A little bit of oregano. Clove or two of garlic, depending on your preference for how much. And good trick for garlic is that you take the back of the knife and you whack it. Sorry about the audio on that one. Must have just killed the guys listening over headphones. And I use garlic crust. Maybe that's sweet, but I use a garlic crust. I would not add the garlic right away because garlic doesn't take very long to cook, and it can easily overcook and become bitter. We're getting to the red, don't worry. All right, so I would let this simmer for a little bit, and then I would add a can of crushed tomato. And I would have to let that simmer and simmer and simmer and cook down because you don't want runny tomato sauce on your pizza. You want it to be thick. And you push that over to the side. All right, next slide, please. Okay, now, changing the version, we'll just move on to writing and you're not going to have. So, the most important thing to think about before you even begin to write your article is who your audience is. So, in terms of the journal world, it's whether or not the paper is written for biologists, engineers, exercise scientists, clinicians. And the pizza analogy for that is whether somebody's from New York, whether they're from Chicago, vegetarians or vegans, because you don't want to be given a thick, deep dish pizza to a New Yorker who's going to come over, and you don't want to give a thin crust to somebody from Chicago. So you want to think about which audience is going to be most interested in your paper. And it also affects how you're going to write and what you need to explain. As far as the other thing to decide, generally before I begin writing, I try to decide which journal it's going to go into. And this is a balance between the reputation of the journal, the constraints. In other words, if you have a long story to tell, we can't necessarily do that in the Journal of Biomechanics because they have a very strict word count. Number of figures and tables. Some journals charge per figure, some journals only allow you a certain number. And there's more and more there are page charges for class 1, for example, has a pretty significant publication charge. In terms of your career, the review turnaround time is pretty important. You don't want to pick a journal that has a reputation for slow turnaround. The analogies for this is how many people are coming over your house for dinner. It's a constraint on how many pizzas you need to make. And then, of course, your budget for what ingredients you're going to have and how much time you have to make the pizza. Next, please. All right, now, people don't really, I can say this for over and over and over again, and many people refuse to do it, but I try to enforce on my students the idea of making an outline. I'm serious about this. It's way too easy to sit down at a word processor and start to write, but waste your time because you don't have a structure of where you're going with this article, and I think that it's important to not write at first, but just to make an outline. And I generally do it on paper because I'm old-fashioned. So, you want to list what the key articles are from the literature. By this time that we're writing the article, you should know the articles, but probably time has elapsed from when you design the study to when you're writing it up. So it's a good time to do another review of literature. The most important thing is to list your hypotheses, and this gives your paper a structure. Everything in the paper is going to be revolving around those hypotheses. In this And so you do write, but you don't write the whole document. You just have an outline of these things. I would list some methods of things that maybe the title of the paragraphs that we're going to have, and start to work on the diagrams for the methods, because that can take time. And as we all know, advisors are not all that fast at providing feedback. So while they're looking at other things and doing those things, you can be working on diagrams. And most of your advisors don't know how to use, especially me, don't know how to use the programs that you need to use to make diagrams, like Adobe Illustrator. All right. I would make a list of the figures and the tables for the results section. And of course, it's going to be an expansive list. Eventually, that's going to pare down, or it's going to change and you're going to have a different number. But it gives you a list. It gives you a goal to start working on. Discussion section we'll talk about in a little bit. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a personal preference. I vastly prefer to use the active voice when I write. And to give you an example of what I mean by the active voice, the active voice, in my opinion, is analogous to homemade pizza made from scratch, and it's that much more preferable than delivery pizza from Pizza Hut. And an example of the active voice would be a sentence like, "We made a damn good pizza." And an example of the passive voice would be, "Passive was made to taste like cardboard." So there's the subject in the actor in that last sentence isn't even visible. So try, in my opinion, experiment with the active voice. See if you can convince your advisor that the active voice is easier and more clear. All right. At this point, you've got an outline. You've have your hypotheses in sort of sketched out, at least a list of your hypotheses. And I encourage my students to start by writing the last paragraph of the introduction. And the last paragraph of the introduction should have your question. It should clearly state your hypotheses. And it's an opportunity to use just a few sentences to explain the logic or the rationale of your experimental design. I don't like at the end of the introduction to tell too much about what's in the methods. It's not the detailed section. It's an overview. And when you finish this, I would give that I recommend you give that to your advisor. And because you want to have this process, assuming your advisor is going to be a co-author, or even if they're not, you want to get your advisor's agreement on it, because if you can't agree on this, you go off writing other sections, you could be wasting your time. So you definitely want to get their okay before you move on. Yeah. So while you wait for your advisor, I suggest that you write the message section. And partly this is before you forget what you did, because time can elapse. Prompts come into play, all sorts of other things can interfere with progress in getting this paper done. So the methods, I'm not going to tell you too much about. They vary from study to study and lab to lab. But the most important thing about methods is they have to be detailed enough to allow replication by another scientist. So another scientist in the field. So you don't have to describe what a force platform is if you're published in the Journal of Biomechanics. But you do need to specify which force platform you use and what sampling frequency and how you filter that data. Next, please. All right. So the method section is the pan. That's the analogy of the pan, and there are some key elements to the method section. None of them are terribly exciting to talk about. Everybody starts with if it's a human subject study, which is mostly what we do in my lab. That's going to lead off. Always remember to include some statement that you have approval from your IRB, or that if you're doing some sort of a mechanical testing of a material, like I don't know. Reindeer antler, you need to specify where those materials were obtained and how it's to the health of those species or something like that. List the protocol in chronological order, that way people can imagine themselves, and I try to write it as though the person is walking through the, literally walking through the experiment. And then special equipment or measurements. Again, diagrams are quite worthwhile in the method section. And finally, a shout out to Chris Ariano. You need to have a section about, he just graduated from my lab, and he was always impressing upon the importance of statistics, much to my resistance. Next. All right, results. The sauce. I think before I go here, I'm going to add my crushed tomato. The onions are translucent and not burnt, and the garlic hasn't burned because I turned it down to a simmer. And so I'll add my crushed tomatoes or whole tomatoes, peeled tomatoes. on the lab one, and I'll take my spoon out so it doesn't melt before you're very All right. Next section is results. And I would suggest, even though this is a talk about writing, I would suggest that you don't write anything until you've completed the figures in the table. The figures and tables are what everybody's going to look at first, and they're the most important, and you have to agree as to what the figures and tables are before you start describing them. So make your figures and tables, and then write the captions and the legends. The captions and the legends combined with the tables actually almost should be adequate enough, adequate for a results section. But the tradition is that we have text, mandatory text as well. I would like to recommend a book. Again, a personal preference. It's called The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. It's by Tufton, as the author's name. And he emphasizes simplicity and clarity of figures. We have more and more complicated graphics programs that can make chart many variables at a time in different colors and different shapes. And, but I don't think that the quality of figures has improved very much in the last 10 years. And I think this is a good inspirational book for emphasizing clarity. Personal opinion, just throw this one in. I prefer standard error mean bars in my figures and standard deviation in tables. My rationale is that you can always calculate the standard error mean from the ST in your tables, but the SEM bars allow me to sort of envision two SEM bars and decide sort of look how different things are before, without reading the detail section. All right, next slide, please. Okay, after you complete the figures and tables, I like to just think about describing those in words. That's the job of the results section. So what I recommend is that you print out a graph and then ask a lab mate to be the audience. And people have a hard time. Sometimes they can say things verbally, but when they sit down at the keyboard, they freeze. So there's lots of apps for audio recorders. There are actually old things called tape recorders that you might be able to find somewhere in a museum. But some sort of an audio recorder, and turn it on and put it casually on the table so that you're not thinking about it. But just try and describe what you want your lab mate to see in that graph. And sometimes you verbalize it very clearly when you are using your fingers to point to certain things, and it can take a lot of time. So after you do that for that figure, then you transcribe what you recorded into text, of course. Yep. All right, the discussion section. So this is analogous to the cheese and the toppings, again, it's where there's the most possibility for creativity. However, if you think about it, the vast majority of pizzas have only two cheeses. There's hundreds of cheeses from around the world, and yet I've only had slight variations on the mozzarella or the feta cheese. Sometimes you can get a blue cheese pizza, but the reason is that people don't like a totally unpredictable pizza. Most people don't. So discussion section has a certain order that the reader expects to find things. So this is my basic recipe for the discussion section. And it's in order how the sections would appear in the paper. So I like to start with, remember the framework of the paper, the crust of the paper is the hypotheses. So I start with the first hypothesis in the discussion section. I say whether I accept it or reject it. I compare the findings that we described in the results section to previous studies who may have measured the similar things to say whether or not your study is consistent or valid. And then I'll go to the second hypothesis, and if there is a third hypothesis, I'll go to the third hypothesis. So those that starts out your discussion section. The next thing is to talk about interesting findings that were not hypothesized. Hopefully you discover something that you couldn't predict ahead of time, but it's still useful to talk about. It's okay to have figures in the discussion section. I've had people say that that's improper, but I say, it's a good place where you want to explain something that wasn't just the basic data, but where you want to bring several graphs together to make some synthesis. So it's okay to have figures in your discussion section. The next part I talked about are limitations. Some people like to put limitations up front and get those out of the way. but I try to get the main messages across at the beginning of the discussion section and then talk about the limitations as we move on. Finally, future studies. This is not mandatory, and depending on where you are in your career, you may not want to give away your best ideas for future studies, but you want to have some inclination of where you're going. And it also is an opportunity of what I remember talking with Dan Ferris about this. It's a fire hydrant opportunity, depending on where you are at your stage in your career. So dogs mark territory by with fire hydrants, and if you want to steer people away from studying the next logical step, you can say something in this section like, we've begun a preliminary study of blank, and then people say, well, you probably can't get there quicker than we can. So it's a fire hydrant opportunity, if you would like. And finally, end with a restatement of your main findings, because people are not going to read your paper word for word linearly through the entire thing. They're going to skim. They're going to look for the hypotheses. They're going to look for whether or not you accepted or rejected your hypotheses, and then look for what your main findings or your conclusions are. Now, this is just an opinion. I think it's often helpful to go back after you've written the discussion section. Almost finished with it, and gone through a few drafts, and go back and eliminate about one paragraph of speculation. Now, I've had differing opinions from colleagues. David Carrier at the University of Utah told me that he actually sort of does the opposite. He goes back and adds a paragraph of speculation. And I think there is, as I said, discussion section is where there's room for creativity. Next, please. All right, now the abstract. So linearly, the abstract is the first thing in the paper, but I suggest that you write it last. But don't rush it, and don't do a crummy job, because it's really important. You can do all the work on the other sections of the paper, and if you write aloud the abstract, sometimes the editor is going to read aloud the abstract and say, send that to the Journal of Unimportant Results or something like that. So it's also when, if you haven't been in the review process, if you are a reviewer, often the editor will send out the title and the abstract of the manuscript, and you can decide, the reviewer can decide whether to review it or not. And so that's all they see. They don't get to see all the rest of your hard work. So don't stamp on the abstract, but it's easiest and most logical to write it last, so you don't have to rewrite it. Next group. All right, time to assemble the pizza. I've got a wooden cutting board. That's the kind of surface I like to use. I'm going to take a handful of flour, exactly one handful, and spread it out on the wood cutting board. Then I come over to my bread machine and pretend that the dough is finished. And here's the dough, magically. And I am not a pizza tosser. I'm not sure that you can toss a pizza half whole wheat. But I also just don't see a whole lot of reason for doing it. It's mostly for show. If you talk to many chefs, many of my chef colleagues that I have, they'll tell me they don't toss their pizza either. But if you want to toss the pizza for show, you're welcome to it. The other reason I don't is because this is a round cutting board, and it's just about the right size for my pan. So I know that if I do it this way, it's going to fit just about perfectly. Back to my canola oil. I don't use olive oil for this step myself. Canola oil. Put that in my frying pan. Oh yeah, this is a little unusual. I know there are many different pans that people can use for pizza. Some people use a pizza stone. Some people grill their pizza. I've never grilled a pizza. What I like to use is a cast iron skillet. And I went to college in Chicago at Northwestern, so I cut my teeth on deep dish pizza. And for me, a cast iron skillet makes a very nice deep dish pizza. So what I did there was I spread oil into the pan. I poured a little bit of oil, maybe a tablespoon, and then I smoothed it out, distributed it evenly with a paper towel. And then I just toss that crust into there, and I can form the edges of the deep dish pizza up in that skillet. So next, I'll take the sauce that I sauce wouldn't be red. Put some sauce on there. Spread it out as evenly as you want. This is a good time if you want to make it a little bit tougher. Is to put some spinach in there, cooked spinach, not cooked spinach, but fresh spinach that you spread out. That's what I often do at home. And life's too short, in my opinion, to spend it grating cheese. So I buy the pre-grated cheese. It's the same thing in the store at Safeway. There's a block of mozzarella and there's a grated bag of mozzarella. And when I get home on Friday, after a hard week of telling graduate students what to do, I don't even have the energy to grate my own cheese. Then we get to, of course, toppings. This is why I do like red onions, which are actually purple. And I'm making I guess it's a vegetarian pizza. It's not a vegan pizza because of the cheese. And some people are onion choppers. I'm onion slicers so that we get the nice rings. Just aesthetically for me, I like that better. And then this is going to be a red pepper and red onion pizza. And that's not sure if that's usable. Sorry, it's not a professional cooking channel, folks. And one of the nice things about making your own pizza is that the toppings don't really cost much extra. So they're really stingy with toppings in many commercial pizza places. But I'm going to put a whole pepper on it and distribute those. It's sort of a random distribution, gassing. And then it's time to put the pizza in the oven. So I'll put that in here. Next slide, please. Always good to have a beverage while you're cooking, in my opinion. Now, just a few tips that I'm going to close with here before while the pizza is in the oven magically cooking. I think it's really important to eliminate distractions. Writing is the most important thing you do as a graduate student. It's how you get out of wherever you are. It's how you move on to the next phase of your career. So I suggest that you get out of the office, go to the library or someplace where there won't be other graduate students who are asking for your help. I suggest that you turn off your internet connection on your computer. Do not check your email or Facebook, or set some sort of a timer that you have to at least work for an hour before you check that urgent email. I suggest that you turn off your cell phone and that you dedicate a fixed amount of time to writing articles, because that's how you finish your PhD. Thanks. Now, there are some psychological strategies that I've observed in my graduate students. Each of my students seems to have found a different time in the day when they write this. Young-Hee Chang, now professor at Georgia Tech, would try writing during the day, and he'd send me drafts that I would get at 5 o'clock, and they were crap. But when I would take the drafts from Young-Hee, when he hit his groove at about 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night to 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'd get them first thing in the morning, they'd be fantastic. But on the other hand, Tim Griffin, another of my graduate students, Tim checked in at 8 o'clock and left at 5 o'clock. He wrote very methodically, he wrote beautifully, just like Young-Hee, but the time of day is different. Max Darwin would always be, I get the best stuff from him between about 11 in the morning and 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's when he'd be at the coffee shop writing, and that's where it worked best for him. So figure out when in the 24-hour cycle you write best. And the bread machine is making too much noise for recording right now. So figure out that time and then reserve it. Schedule it. If you have a day timer or something on your an app on your iPhone or whatever, schedule that writing and treat it like it's an appointment, because it's the most important thing you do. There's a difference in philosophy. It's always a trade-off. You don't get any writing done when your butt's not in the chair. Right? But on the other hand, if your butt's been in the chair too long, it's common to get stuck. And getting up and walking around when you're stuck, studies have shown, that it improves the mental process. So it's really a very difficult balance. One way to do it is to work until you get stuck on something specific, and then just get up and walk for a short amount of time. Make sure your laptop doesn't get stolen from the library. But this is always the trade-off between keeping your butt in the chair and getting stuck, and just walking and getting distracted by somebody you run into your friend in the library or something like that. Okay, it's often easier to verbalize things than to write them down. So again, when you get stuck on how to say something in particular, so many times somebody has come to me, a graduate student, say, I don't know how to say this. And I say, well, what are you trying to say? And they'll say it verbally, and I'll say, yes, write that down. But usually it escapes us. So it's another time to use an audio recorder, and then transcribe it later. Finally, we're just creatures like rats. We respond to rewards, and if we set up a reward system, that, okay, if I get done with the method section today, then I can go downhill skiing, or go get a ice cream sandwich or something like that. I don't know. Whatever is going to work for you as that cheese that the rat works with. It's important to set those rewards before you begin working, and then it acts as an incentive. Next, please. Okay. Nobody, just answer that again. Nobody is awarded a PhD for having a nice Facebook page. Okay? Unless you're researchers in computer science, in which case it might be web design or something like that. But nobody in biomechanics gets a PhD for writing Facebook. All right? You get a PhD for writing scientific articles. You're only going to probably write 4 or 5 at best during your time as a graduate student. So it's one of the 4 most important things you do. All this other stuff is just, well, I mean, it's collecting data. You have to do that. But a lot of what we do in our daily life is just a distraction. I don't want to disregard or downplay the importance of conferences. That's where one networks and it's important. But presentations at conferences fade quickly, and publications are basically forever. So when you have to weigh things about, well, should I go to the North, South, East, West Carolina Conference on Biomechanics, or should I send in my paper to the Journal of Biomechanics? You should choose the latter. Now, I use this analogy, this final analogy here about chess, and that is that when you're playing chess and you march that pawn down to the last row, that's when it becomes a queen and you generally win the game. And that's pretty much how the game design is. So one submitted article is better or more important than 3 with the dreaded in prep. All right? So when somebody sees in prep and there's too many in preps, it indicates this person doesn't get things done, and that's not a good sign. So get one submitted and then move on. So you can say submitted means way more than in prep. Okay. All right, so I'm going to close here with a reminder of my crazy analogy between writing a scientific article and making a pizza. Introduction is like appetizer or root beer. Your hypothesis or your model for your experiment is the foundation. It's the crust of the pizza. It's what everybody talks about. You don't, when you talk about Chicago style or New York style, you're talking about the crust. And if you have an experiment with clear hypotheses, it's going to be it's likely to be a very good pizza. Methods, personal choice as to which pan you use, but method section is not really much personal choice. It's just factual. It doesn't take too long to write. File, again, a little bit of room for individuality, but in terms of creativity of your graphs, but it's important. It takes a lot of time. You have to allocate the most time to the result section in terms of preparing graphs and figures and analysis. And then the discussion section is where you have that chance of creativity, where you can make the kind of pizza or the kind of paper that people will say, wow, that was really unique, that was special, instead of like, pepperoni again. So, next slide. That should be about it. Yep, it's time to take the pizza out of the oven. And, I just burned myself terribly. Take the imaginary pizza out of the imaginary oven. I forgot to mention the temperature of the oven. The oven is set at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, and after this talk, I'm going to be going to the health center to take care of my first-degree burns that I now have on my imaginary hands. So then I take the pizza out of the pan, washing the spatula which I dropped on the floor, take the pizza out, and it's time for the studio audience, at least, to enjoy a piece of homemade pizza while they think about writing their next scientific article. Bon appetit.
Roger, that was great. This is Jason Franz again. I want to recommend, if you do have a question for Roger, use the Q&A tab that you have available, and we'll go ahead and address any questions that you may have. I'd like to get it started out here. Certainly, this process is something you've developed over your career. I wonder to what extent you having wonderful advisors during your dissertation versus the 20 years since has contributed to your impression on writing scientific articles.
That's a good question. It's changed evolved a lot, partly because of technology. So it used to be that my advisor for my PhD, Dick Taylor, would write out papers longhand on a legal pad and then hand it to his secretary who would type them up. By the time I was a graduate student, we actually had these things called computers, and that evolved. How has it changed, or how did I develop I think I developed the methodology when I had to when I had to advise my students how to write. So by stepping back and having to steer them, I came up on this recipe, this methodology. Before, I think it was a little more haphazard and not structured for writing scientific papers. So many of you are probably teaching assistants, and many of you have experienced that things finally make sense when you have to teach them to somebody else. You may have been puzzled when you were a student yourself, but when you have to teach it to someone else, you really learn how to do it.
All right, so I have a question from Anthony Santiago. He asks, are you an advocate of more papers or larger papers with more content?
Thank you, Anthony. I'm pretty sure the audience is 90% or more graduate students and postdocs. And so, pragmatically, some people, when you apply for a job, will, and in shorthand, when they're talking about hiring someone, they'll say, man, he's got 8 papers, or she's got 5 papers, or whatever. They won't say specifically, wow, she's got one really long paper. It doesn't really impress people as much. And so I think at this stage of your career, I would encourage you to not publish the least publishable unit, but not to wait. To get things out. Field's moving fast, and get it out when it makes an important statement, when there's enough to it. It's not just a piece of, it's not just a slice of cheese pizza, but there's more than just cheese on that pizza.
Well, thank you, Anthony. While you guys are thinking, oh wait, this is Liz Shaw-Larkin, and she asks, how long would you think it should take to go through the complete process of creating the pizza or writing the pizza?
Oh, well, the first one's easy. I can get a pizza, if I use my bread machine and I made the sauce beforehand, I can get a pizza in the oven in about 15 minutes. So, and then at 425 degrees with a cast iron skillet, it takes about 25 minutes to half an hour for the pizza to cook. But I have dogs, and it's a good time to take your dog for a walk. So come home, make the pizza, put it in the oven, take the dog for a walk, come home, and you're all set. Now, the harder question is, how long does it take to write a paper? That's the question?
That's it. So not to write the paper, but the whole process of perhaps writing the paper and to add on to Liz's question, then submission to acceptance.
Okay.
But writing the paper is Liz's question.
There's no one answer for that. It takes a different amount of time depending on how many authors are involved. It takes, unfortunately, longer if there are more authors involved. And it takes longer if it's in the semester, when you're probably teaching or being a TA, than it does when it's in the summer and you can concentrate and block out some time. So I don't think that's an answerable question, except by mathematics. That I don't know. I usually have about 4 or 5 papers a year, So I guess it takes about 2 to 3 months to write a paper by division. That's the only way I can think about how to do it. But that's, you know, if I had no other responsibilities, I could have more papers. So.
Richard Brindle asks, while in graduate school, is it best to keep your papers, the topics of those papers related to one another, or cover a few areas of biomechanics before graduation?
I'm not sure one can decide that ahead of time, but most I've been on a number of search committees and been a faculty member for a long time, so that's the ultimate challenge of getting a faculty position. And when there's a number of candidates percolate down to maybe a handful of 5 or 10, and people, during that process, people acquire sort of a nickname, like, oh, it's the kidney guy, or it's the bone woman, or it's the locomotion dude. And so at that point, having a coherent set of papers gives you an identity, and not just pragmatically, but it gives you a research program. It's like the department that wants to hire you knows where you're going. You're not doing one, to just make an analogy for my lab, because there's not one paper on running shoes, one paper on old people walking with walkers, one paper on modeling the impact of bone or something like that. It's more of a coherent package. So if you can lay out a coherent series of papers, that's ideal. And then what you can do for a postdoc is you can complement that. And I don't mean by complement by saying, hey, that's a nice dissertation. I mean by complementing it, by being the other side. So I use the analogy of this perfect postdoc is like a Reese's peanut butter cup. The peanut butter is good by itself and chocolate is good by itself. But if your career can be combining 2 areas, then that shows that you have some breadth and some vision. So I would say, ideally, my students will concentrate on one topic and have a series of logical experiments.
So a few more questions here. I'm going to go to a person here in that live audience, Rich Ellis.
Hey, I'm Rich. I'm a graduate student with Dr. Kram. I was wondering the nitty-gritty question about the results. So you did something exciting, you have novel findings. Is the better way to start your results with these novel findings, or maybe the logical but necessary steps that you take to get there? How do you recommend going about addressing this?
I think people like to have a structure or something when they're reading it. That's why books have chapters. When pages have paragraphs, it gives us a structure. It makes it easier for have expectations. So people expect you to cover your hypotheses because you've already told us about that. When I've had that opportunity in the past where I discovered something that I didn't expect or didn't hypothesize, I guess there's 2 options. One is you could have a post-hoc hypothesis, but that's not generally encouraged. The other thing to do is to say something like, before moving on to a discussion of our hypotheses, our most exciting finding was blankety blank, and start off with that. But I think that I guess I would argue for the more logical presentation and put that unexpected finding in that section of the discussion. So cover hypothesis 1, cover hypothesis 2, and then say, much to our surprise, we found that people could run on water or something like that. There's just a big run yesterday about that. And then for the rest of the discussion, you can, if that is the most exciting and the most important finding, you can amp that out. You can put that in your abstract. Most surprising, but it's fine to have there's probably a name for it, a clause at the beginning of the sentence that says surprisingly or astonishingly or most interesting.
So we're going to take 2 more questions. Jamil Al-Haddad asks a very... I can't from here. But I think this is an important question for students in ASB who come from abroad and for whom English may not be their first language. And so Jamil asks, how do I respond to a journal reviewer who's wrote a short paragraph of negative comment on the language proficiency, but nothing on the content? Or maybe more broadly.
Nothing on the content.
Nothing on the content. So that's a specific question, and maybe you could address it more broadly.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I understand I'm very lucky to have grown up as a native English speaker because it's being science. It's definitely an advantage. Well, I think that's a pretty cheap shot review if that's all they have in the review. If a person who is a scientist can clearly see the data in the graphs and the tables and interpret whether or not it's an important finding and could, I don't know, I would be encouraging as a reviewer. I would say, well, these are interesting findings and they deserve a better presentation in English. And that sort of, that they deserve something, I think that's probably better received than these are interesting data, but learn to write, which is pretty discouraging. I would never do that as a reviewer. There are a number of strategies. One is that you can literally hire someone who can be a writer for you. And many of the most popular books today are ghostwritten by, so there's some important person, some celebrity who writes a book, but just really throws out the ideas and someone else weaves them together. But of course, as a graduate student, you don't have a lot of time to hire someone to write. So this is a difficult challenge. I can't really think of there's no easy solution to this one. I think breaking it down into smaller parts and asking a fellow graduate student to help you to write those parts, who is a native English speaker, could help. But I'm going to try and think of an answer to this by thinking about what I would do if I went to Germany, because I have a rudimentary understanding of German, but would never try to publish an article in German. And I can easily see an unpleasant comment about the quality of my German writing if I tried to submit a paper. And so I can empathize with this, but I don't have a solution other than I would need to take more German classes. And I think that graduate school is a time when you need to do that. A colleague of mine, Jinping He, who's at Arizona State, came to the United States from Beijing and is brilliant and very successful now, but the hardest thing he said in his career was being able to write grants convincingly in English, and that's where his career would have been either made or broken. And he got help, he got external, he had the resources to hire someone to help him with his written English.
So our final question is from Annabeth Linneman, and she asks, how often do you revise your own paper before sending it to your co-authors and eventually submitting it to a journal? How do you decide that it's ready?
As my graduate students can probably attest, I'm a pain in the butt. I have many versions. So how many versions? If it's a graduate student writing, I know that Anne is not a graduate student, but I'm thinking at least 4 versions and maybe more. So it's a difficult process, but it's really important to be satisfied with that final product. How do I know when it's finished? I know when it's finished when the student gives me the paper and I mark it up, and they give it back to them, and they say, well, last time you said to say it the other way, and that happens more often than I wish. But when it gets to a point where either way is as good to say as the next, it's definitely ready. It's probably ready one stage before that, but I'm enough of a pain in the butt and stickler to ask for control the process by getting one more read of it.
Great. Well, this is Jason Franz again. On behalf of Megan Vick, the student representative of the ASC, and the executive board, I'd like to thank you all for attending our first webinar. I look forward to the student representatives sending additional emails in the future about future webinars. And with that, we thank you for participating.
Cheers.